I think we have enough to start our first Salon Series this evening. Welcome, everyone. For those of you who don't know, my name is Roderick White. I am the Director of Diversity and Community Life at University School of Nashville, and I want to welcome you all. Your Black high school faculty and administrators welcome you to this series of conversations that hopefully will be more than just conversations. We'll go a little bit deeper than surface level. We want to allow an opportunity and a space to answer questions, to have dialogue, to find out, and have these conversations on race, intersectionality, allyship. And we are excited and I can't even reiterate enough, so excited that you all took time this evening to join us. I want to acknowledge the faculty and administrators that we have on the line that are helping to make this possible. I'll start with Dr. Walker, if you'd like to say something, or just say hi from high school.
Hi, everyone. So glad you're here. I'm excited for the conversation tonight and the next few weeks together. So I appreciate you all taking the time, and thanks for being vulnerable and leaning into the conversation. And to particularly the students on the line, I really appreciate you taking time out of your summer. We have current seniors all the way to, we have some brand new 9th graders who are new to USN on the call. So really appreciate all of you taking the time tonight.
And then we, of course, cannot forget Mrs. Juanita Trauber. She's on the line as well.
Good evening. It's so good to see so many familiar faces, as well as some folks I haven't met, some PDS USN alumni. This session is being recorded, so we'd really like to see your face, especially if you're asking a question, but I understand if you don't want to be present on YouTube. And also keep in mind that this session is really for our students. If you could give them an alumni priority when having this conversation tonight. And also, I will do my best to get next week's reading and video materials out to you by Sunday to give you a little more leeway in having time to review them to prepare for the evening. So it's good to see you all. Welcome.
Of course, we have Ms. Nicole Jules, our high school dean of students.
Hi, everyone. Just glad to see you all here. I'm excited about today's session and the questions that will come up and the discussion that will be had. So welcome.
And I'd also like to introduce Mrs. Dana Mayfield, who's on the call this evening as well.
Hello, everyone. I can ditto how happy I am to see you all. Welcome. Looking forward to our discussion.
All right. So the only thing I'd like to add is that and this is piggybacking on what Mrs. Trauber said, when you're speaking and you have an opportunity to speak to the crowd, remember, let's land the plane. If you've not heard that expression before, that expression means simply, if we're bringing it in, go ahead and land it. Sometimes we get caught up in hearing our voices, but we don't want to take away everyone else's time just for the edification of ours. So if we can keep that in mind, that would be fantastic. I'd like to go ahead and jump right in. So I'd like to introduce you today, Mr. Denzel Caldwell. Denzel Caldwell is an active member of Black Lives Matter Nashville. And of course, you all know that the topic that we're talking about today is Black Lives Matter, a matter of moment or a movement. And we've invited Mr. Caldwell to come in and speak in regards to Black Lives Matter, to speak in regards to the history of Black Lives Matter, what brought that forward, and what are we doing now? And then we're going to open it up for questions and conversation, and we want everyone to be involved. So, Mr. Caldwell, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, then I'm going to turn it over to you, and I just want to thank you again for giving of your time. The floor is yours.
All right. Good evening, everyone. As it was stated before, my name is Denzel Caldwell. I am a Nashville native. I joined Black Lives Matter Nashville back in 2016, prior to grad school. And today, before answering questions, I'm going to provide a little bit of a brief history of the network, the Black Lives Matter Global Network, as well as the history of the local chapter here in Nashville. So in terms of the Black Lives Matter network, the origin point begins following the case of Trayvon Martin back in roughly 2012 or 2013. There was a woman by the name of Alicia Garza who wrote a Facebook status in response to the situation. It was a poem. And at the end of that poem was a hashtag, Black Lives Matter. And at that point, that hashtag had become very viral, essentially. And it caught on at the moment. It kind of captured the feeling that a lot of Black folks in the country felt following the Trayvon Martin case. And so what followed after that was her linking with Opal Tometi, as well as Patrice Colliers, the three of which represent the co-founders or founders of the Black Lives Matter Global Network. Since that time, the network has expanded and chapters were erected, particularly following the Ferguson uprising, as we like to call it, after the acquittal of Michael Brown's murder in Ferguson. We are a global network, as I stated before. So we have chapters within the United States, as well as the UK and Canada. As far as the Nashville chapter of Black Lives Matter, that began roughly at the end of 2014, and specifically at the beginning of 2015, where 15 young Black folks, a couple of natives, other graduate students, came together and decided to form the chapter shortly after coming from Ferguson. And so at the beginning of that chapter, in February 2015, or prior to that, there was an action in Nashville, or protest in Nashville, in response to the series of police murders of Black folks at the time. And so since then, Black Lives Matter Nashville has been a part of work that's related to police reform, from the Justice on Jefferson Street, where we helped along with the community in the area to thwart the construction of a police headquarters on Jefferson Street. We were also involved in the Ban the Box campaign. And for those who don't know, that was the effort to remove the box in an employee checklist or employee application as to whether or not someone was convicted of a felony. We were also involved in the coalition with other organizations to help bring about the Community Oversight Board in hopes of creating greater accountability for the Metro Nashville Police Department. And we were currently, we're actually a part of the coalition of called the Nashville People's Budget Coalition, which is a combination or coalition of several grassroots organizations that are trying to empower the greater Nashville community to take control of the budget, the city budget, know what's actually being prioritized in the city budget, and investing it in public resources, whether they are already implemented or have yet to be created, in hopes of creating and redefining public safety in the city, especially for Black and Brown communities. And so that's just a little bit of our history here in Nashville. I kind of want to let this to be a discussion, sort of a Q&A. And so I want to open it up for any questions folks might have, and I'll do my best to respond.
I'll start with one, Denzel. Just in regards to your involvement, was there a seminal moment that prompted you or told you, hey, I'm going to join Black Lives Matter? What was that moment for you?
Honestly, I would say it's hard to say, because with my upbringing, my father did a was very intentional about infusing my surroundings with our history and developing my understanding of Black people's plight, not only in America, but across the globe. And so following, I would say roughly 2015, when I was coming home from undergrad, I caught up with some friends who were involved in movement work back here at home. And I said, you know what? This is a moment that's supercharged. A lot of people are mobilized. I really feel the spirit of the moment. I really need to do more than study. I need to be out in my city, in my home city. And so I had a couple friends who brought me to some friends of friends who just so happened to be a part of the chapter. And so since then, I had just jumped in. I participated in actions. I built relationships with organizers and activists across the city who are doing really good work in different areas, and it was natural from there.
Can I have a follow-up question to that, Denzel? Just thinking about, as you thought about building this coalition of people and reaching out, I'm thinking about the students we work with. How did you go about identifying and moving like this network? How did you mobilize a network of people who were interested and willing to act in the same way that you were? Like, you're a native, you've been here, you've watched the city. How did you kind of grab that network and harness that energy, especially for younger people?
Well, I guess I'll speak to that just kind of like, just as far as this moment. One of the things that I'll reference Kwame Nkrumah, and for those who don't know, Kwame Nkrumah is also Stokely Carmichael. And one of the things that he said was that it's not essentially that it's not only important to mobilize people, but also to organize. And so one of the things that that I try to do is to meet people where they are. Right? Everybody is not very well read on intersectionality or concepts like abolition or the exception clause to the 13th Amendment. And so what I do is I try to take people in the current understanding, and also not just with their understanding, but keeping in mind the current moment, and connecting that moment to the larger trend or the larger desire for Black lives to be made freer and to feel safer. And so what I do is I start there by trying to be a sort of light in answering some of those questions people might have. Why is it that there are so many Black folks being killed and displayed on television? Why is it that I see so many police in my neighborhood? To why is it that I feel this way as one of the few Black children in a classroom that's mostly white or non-Black, and I'm dealing with different name calling or feelings of uncomfort, and I start there, and I try to offer some type of context, and it's not always throwing a book or a theory at someone. Sometimes it's just affirming people's feelings, right? Whether it's, yeah, you know what, I felt that way too when I was in high school, and I had my moments, or I felt that way too when, I was at work or somewhere else. And so I try to start where people are. And then if the conversation or if the moment leads to a theory, or if it leads to a certain incident of whether it's police brutality or something larger and systemic and more invisible, then we'll discuss that. And then, but the most important part that I try to include in conversations where I try to galvanize people and organize people into the moment is I bring it to action, right? And so, because it's one thing to discuss, like what's happening, how I feel, but it's another thing to talk about action and how you can actually plug in to change these material conditions for Black folks. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, very much so. there's a question from one of our alums, who also is one of our dear colleagues in the chat, from Jeff Greenfield, about kind of the multiracial composition of what we're seeing now in recent protests versus historically kind of a different composition. What are you seeing now in terms of Black Lives Matter Nashville, and or on a national or international level in terms of who is populating the movement?
That's actually a very fascinating question. I think we're seeing a lot of different things, right? So compared to before, I think police violence has always been visible to a certain degree, especially to Black folks. But I think especially back in 2012, when we saw this sort of like hyper visibility of Black death, whether it be by vigilantes or police, this is where it was sort of put into the national spotlight. I think at the beginning, you sort of you see this sort of hyper reactionary response to the Trayvon Martin incident, as well as the series that followed. And so it was just like sort of this hyperactivation, this sort of spring. I think since then, we've been seeing sort of this buildup, right? So there have been more and more incidents of deaths. And along with these deaths, we've also seen sort of a discussion of other more invisible systemic issues that have kind of added to that sort of like mobilization, right? I think since 2012, you've seen more folks get involved in movement work. You've seen some get plugged into the global network, to other organizations that are adjacent to us. And I think also too, I think what we've also seen is sort of a resurgence of a more international awareness as well. Because a lot of people are starting to understand that this plight against Black folks isn't just exclusive to Black folks here, but also across the globe, and it manifests in different ways. And so I think you have that. I think honestly, COVID played a huge role. COVID-19 played a huge role, I think, with the pressure that comes from staying within the homes, this hyper awareness of how the virus affects each of us, some of us disproportionately more than others, on top of the hyper sort of sense of safety. A lot of people are feeling the heat. A lot more people are feeling the heat, honestly. And so I think as a result, you're starting to see more and more folks jump in, whether it be through organizations or imperfectly, or individually. And so I think those are some of the major factors that we're seeing. I think also too, a lot of ideas that were considered fringe or radical are normalizing too. I think we're kind of seeing the sort of the fruits of that labor. So conversations about defunding the police, or even more so abolition, prison abolition. I think the presence of different documentaries and ideas such as the 13th documentary, for those who haven't seen it on Netflix, and different projects like that have been put into the national consciousness. And so you get that coupled with COVID, and coupled with the recent murders, on top of the trend since 2012, you get this moment where a lot more people are feeling hyper mobilized, and in a way that we haven't seen ever. There's a historical precedent. I mean, I think I saw on a news report at one point that there were actions in all 50 states going on for, at the time, it was going on for 12 days straight, and there's still actions now. And so I think there's just been a buildup. I think COVID has kind of accelerated it, and I think certain ideas that were considered radical are now being normalized.
All right, I'd like to follow up with that. We've got some students that have posted some questions, but I think it's better to hear from them. Let's start with Samia, if you don't mind. If you'd like to hop on and ask your question, Mr. Caldwell, I think that's great.
For sure. Yeah. I was just curious as to what sort of the Nashville chapter is doing. What are your priorities in the city, and like where do you see the greatest need for improvement?
Okay, that's a great question. So as I said earlier, what we're doing right now is we're working in coalition with the Nashville People's Budget Coalition. And that is a series or a group of grassroots organizations who come together to change the narrative about what public safety means. There's been a lot of conversations in Nashville, although it's not unique to Nashville, about how do we address the root of the problems that the police don't seem to solve effectively. And so one of the ways that we're proposing to address that is for us to divest from the amount of money that's being used on hyper policing, on hyper incarceration in the city, and investing that money into public services that people need. And that can vary from more investment in public hospitals to social services that already exist that address issues such as mental health or any other type of even a reproductive issue, or investing in our public education system, because a lot of this conversation or concern about divestment from police is very interesting because there's long been a divestment in our public education system. So those are just kind of some of the examples of things that we're interested in doing. Right now, again, we're working with the Nashville People's Budget Coalition. We're trying to invite more folks to attend public hearings, like with the council, Metro City Council, to hear like where the budget, how the budget is being prioritized, especially in this moment with COVID, knowing that a lot of people need resources to meet their basic needs. We're encouraging folks to really wrestle with the idea of not only defunding police, but going so far as to imagining a world where we transform the idea of safety to where hyper policing isn't needed, where we pay professionals who specialize in mental health services or education and properly fund them and equip them to address these problems at the root, rather than just throwing people in jail or murdering them potentially. And so that's a little bit of the work that we're doing with the Nashville People's Budget Coalition. And later on, I can actually give you ways to plug in.
We had another question in the chat line. This is a student, I believe. Actually, there's two. Is Adrian available? You got two questions here. So I can certainly read them out.
I think she's calling in from St. Louis, if it's Adrian, who I think it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm also cooking dinner, so. Hello. So a couple questions. One was, I'm curious to hear your opinion on certain companies recently seemingly jumping on the bandwagon and making Juneteenth a holiday.
Okay. My honest answer is that it is they're trying to placate the momentum. The reality is that and there are more people that are getting involved in this work. Yeah, and it is multiracial. But the momentum of the network, of the movement, of the Black liberation movement, the Black Lives Matter movement is picking up. And so the response is adjusting accordingly, right? We didn't see these pushes a year ago, right? Years ago when this momentum started to pick up, or this movement started to pick up. But now that we're starting to see more people who are quite honestly fed up with what's been going on systemically, the reforms or the placation is picking up, right? So now there's discussion about Juneteenth. Now companies who were previously silent about Black Lives Matter, who may have issues with their employment practices, are saying Black Lives Matter, at least in name. Or some companies might be removing certain mascots that were long deemed racist and suddenly doing that as a moment to, or as an attempt to appease the moment, or to sort of quell the moment. So in short, I would say it's an attempt to placate and to quell the moment and to quell the momentum. And I think I can safely say a lot of people are not falling for it.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and ask my follow-up question so I can go back to cooking my dinner. How do we keep the same energy around this 60 days, a year from now, and make people understand that even though we feel like we're in a sprint now, that it really is a marathon?
Glad you asked that question. So I'm going to go back to Kwame Nture, or Stokely Carmichael, as he is previously named. There are two aspects to this work. There's mobilization and there's organization. Mobilization is what you see on TV or what you see outside, depending if whether or not you're going to a protest. It's people being activated, people going to the actions, it's people disrupting daily activity to tell folks or to demand accountability from the police, or to yell Black Lives Matter in a space that it isn't the most, doesn't practice that the most, let me say. That's mobilization. That's getting out there and making noise and doing the things that you have to do to get people to move. Organization is arguably the most critical part. And to answer your question, that is the point that follows, right? People need to be attached to organizations. People need to be attached to campaigns. People need to engage in political education so that the next time there is an incident, or the next time there's an attempt to further reinforce these systems of oppression, that people are able to identify the problem, and as a result, using their creativity and what they've learned while politically educating themselves or organizing, they're able to come up with a solution based on their context. So to answer your question, I would say that to maintain this energy, people have to attach themselves to organizations, whether in Nashville, whether you're talking about for Black folks, Black Lives Matter Nashville, Gideon's Army, for allies showing up for racial justice Nashville. If you want to be involved in nonviolent work as it relates to actions, Neon Guard, there's plenty of organizations. Black Lives Matter Nashville isn't the only one, but people have to plug in, and people have to attach themselves to groups of people that are making an intentional effort to educate themselves about these systems, and more importantly, apply that education to change our material reality. See a question, someone has their hand raised.
I'm sorry, I don't know the technology, sorry. I'm a parent of a high school student, no reflection on my lack of technology, but I'd like and not just to you, Denzel, anyone who would answer this for me, I'd like the elevator script, if you will. Today I had a contractor come to my house and he was explaining to me how he didn't understand that a recent Muslim parish had all Black Lives Matter, and there were vandals that came and changed it to All Lives Matter, and he didn't understand why that was considered vandalism. And immediately I'm reacting, which then will shut him down. And so I would love the elevator conversation as to why, when someone says, well, don't all lives matter, what this is really about when we say Black Lives Matter.
So in short, I would say, if it's true that all lives matter, then you wouldn't have an issue saying that Black Lives Matter.
Right.
So, that's the short answer. I think if you want to add on to that, it's nothing is more indicative of systemic racism or a larger problem with how Black folks are treated than how people are responding to Black Lives Matter. If that is an actual fact, then no one would have an issue with seeing that statement on a wall, or seeing that or seeing that yelled out loud. You know, just as the sky is blue, Black Lives Matter. And so, yeah, that's the short answer. I mean, needless to say, I have a million answers for that, but
That's all
okay.
I didn't want to engage and go on my, I just wanted to say what I needed to say. Thank you. That's helpful.
No, I appreciate that question.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Any questions from the students? Love to hear from my young people.
I guess I have another question.
Okay.
Regarding social media specifically, do you think it's a good way to sort of increase interest, gauge feedback, get information, or do you see it as kind of a mechanism that may work at the beginning, but it dies out quickly, things like that? Like, what's your opinion on social media as a route for activism?
Okay. So I'm gonna preface this by saying that I'm a millennial, right? So I'm on the cusp of the time where social media wasn't a thing, and then the time where social media was the norm, right? So I'm gonna preface it by saying that social media amplifies what's already there, right? So if you are someone who is taking the time to read, to understand your conditions, and you're plugged into the outside world in whatever way that you can, and you project that message on social media, you're going to connect with other people who are doing the same thing or who wish to do the same thing, right? I think on the other hand, if you are someone who is not engaged in critical thinking, someone who is not seeking to understand, but sort of to denigrate or to troll or anything like that, you are also going to have a platform, and your voice is going to amplify and project into the greater social media universe, and it's going to create an effect in the universe that could hamper the previous group. So I would say that it's a double-edged sword. I think we're in an age where people are more interconnected as ever. I also think, and this is going to sound like a contradiction, that in some instances we are more disconnected than ever, right? So how do we wrestle with those contradictions, right? I think part of that is, as it relates to your question about social media and activism, I think it's, as you are engaging in study and you're curious, you go out and you seek those spaces where people are engaging and thinking about these ideas to change material reality, right? I personally, I'm very active on social media, especially Facebook. And so, like, I've been able to encounter people that weren't in my vicinity. I met folks across the planet, folks in different cities, folks in different organizations who I probably wouldn't have met otherwise, but because of the ideas that I was engaging, because of the posts that I make, because of the things that I represent, a lot of those things gravitated towards me. So I would say, yes, it can be used for activism. I mean, when we think about certain ideas like the issue with Centoya Brown, for example, social media played a huge role in uplifting that case again. You know, from Rihanna retweeting about it to a lot of other folks. I mean, even with Breonna Taylor in this current moment, social media played a huge role in how that case was reignited, and the list goes on. So it's definitely a powerful tool. It can be used as a powerful obstacle as well. So I would say that, yeah, it can be used for good. I just think we just have to use it more critically. Great question.
Thank you.
I do want to take this moment before the next question to provide some clarity about what you may see on the news versus reality. So as I said before, Black Lives Matter initially was a hashtag. And so because of that hashtag going viral and sort of defining the moment, including now, that's become the moniker for the entire moment, right? We're calling this the Black Lives Matter moment. Though this moment is called the Black Lives Matter moment, not everyone who is in this moment is a part of the Black Lives Matter global network, right? So there's an actual organization, of which I'm a part of, that's called the Black Lives Matter Global Network. There are different chapters, official chapters, that are associated with the global network. And so that exists. One thing that you will see a lot of news reports here, as well as in other cities and across the world, country and world, where news reporters will say, this Black Lives Matter activist, da 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 da. Everyone who is not, everyone who is called a Black Lives Matter activist is not necessarily part of the organization. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing necessarily. It's just important to tell the truth to the masses so people can have the correct information. There is an organization, and there are folks who align with the moment who are part of the larger Black Lives Matter movement, Black Liberation movement. And so, yeah, I think that's important to know. That's important to know. If you ever hear Movement for Black Lives, that is a coalition organization comprised of several Black-led grassroots organizations, including Black Lives Matter. That they also include people like A Million Hoodies. I forget some of the other organizations, but that is a coalition, right? So again, you have the larger Black Lives Matter movement, the larger movement. You have the organization or network that's called Black Lives Matter Global Network with different chapters. And then you have Movement for Black Lives. So I just wanted to add that as well.
So we got a couple of questions coming in here on the chat. Yeah, if you'd like to address those, you can go right ahead.
I do see one question about donations. Where I can actually give you the link for that. Donate directly to local chapters. These are people you can see, touch. These are people who are addressing your issues in your city. The local is global, as I believe a former Black Panther said. I don't quote me on that, but the local is the most important. One of the most important dimensions. This is something that immediately impacts your life. And so I would say donate locally. You can donate to us at paypal.me/Black Lives Matter Nash. That is our PayPal link. Our PayPal link can also be found on our Facebook page, our Twitter page, as well as our Instagram page. So if you want to donate to us, you can donate there. I would also encourage you to seek out donating to organizations like Gideon's Army, donating to people like, or donating or plugging into people like Nashville People's Budget Coalition, Free Hearts, No Exceptions Prison Collective. Those are some examples of grassroots organizations in Nashville that you can actually seek out. You can find all of them on social media, and they all have plugs. They all have plugs. They all have links and pages that you can go to and donate to them directly. Another one that I want to mention is the Nashville Community Bail Fund. Nashville Community Bail Fund does work not only for protesters who may be incarcerated, but also for people who are low income, who cannot afford bail when they are arrested. So I would also encourage you to donate to them directly. Local. You can always see when you donate local, you're donating directly into your community. So I would say that just across the board, if anybody that you know, whether they're in the city or elsewhere, ask you, well, where should I be donating? One, do your research. do your due diligence. Ask questions, please. But donating local is the way to go.
I don't want this one about from Elaine and Sproul Driver. Do you guys want to ask that question?
Oh. My son is telling me how to unmute my computer here. Yeah, I said it, kind of tried to say it in a shorthand fashion. How does the Black Lives Matter leadership really address those who complain about, rioting, looting, vandalism that unfortunately gets blurred with what would otherwise be, what I would call a righteous protest? How do you respond to that?
Couple things. I want to challenge I think it's complex. I think I want to challenge the notion of this sort of dichotomy between peaceful protester, violent protester, right? Yes, there are people who are out there who wish to do nothing more than to cause trouble for people who are outraged, who are justifiably fed up, honestly. And I do want to make that distinction. There are people who do that. There are also people who are fed up and who recognize that none of the environment in which they're in is owned by them. It belongs to them. And so they may engage in what we like to call violent act. And then there are those who engage in more what people term peaceful or things like that. I would say that as an organization, we want to be strategic. We want to be very mindful. We want to keep people safe as an organization. But we don't want to go out of our way to condemn those who are angry because of the moment, or because of the current reality. Because the reality is that these systems are violent. The reality is that poverty is violent. The reality is that the disparities that we experience daily are violent. And so I do want to provide that nuance. But yes, there are people who are who intentionally go to create unnecessary havoc in a way that is counter to why people are angry. But again, there are also people who are justifiably angry and who use a variety of means to express that anger. So I want to provide that distinction and to sort of add to this conversation, because it's a lot more complicated than people who are protesting, maybe not doing something, and people who are doing something else. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. But I guess I'll add to that too. Very much so like movements before, there are folks who are very intentional about spreading misinformation, about orchestrating certain events to lay blame on Black folks, especially our organization. And I do want to acknowledge that reality. That is a very real thing. But it's nothing new, right? This is something that existed in the Civil Rights Movement. This is something that existed during the time of the Black Panthers. COINTELPRO is a real thing. And for those who don't know what that is, counterintelligence program, those things are real. And there are also folks who are filled with hate that will find ways to attack folks who are expressing their justifiable anger. And so I do want to acknowledge those realities. I think I would be remiss not to acknowledge that. And so I think for those who want to see a better material reality, especially for Black folks, one of the things that you have to be committed to is seeking the truth. And having these conversations is a part of that. It's not enough just to hear about what you think you know about an organization, what you think you know about a certain grievance, what you think you know about a certain action. But it's important to investigate, figure out why people are saying the things that they're saying. And for those, even whether it's news, whether it's an article, one of the questions that you want to keep in mind is who controls the narrative, and what narrative are they trying to portray to you? And that goes beyond even this moment, right? We're talking about this specific issue as relates to Black Lives Matter, the moment or the movement. But that applies, that's general critical thinking, but it's especially because we're in a moment where we're trying to change material conditions for Black folks and for the larger global society, that we want to ask critical questions and we want to go to the source. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that question.
Looks like we have another question from a student.
Mm-hmm.
Lillian, are you willing to share your question?
Yeah, so I just was wondering how you feel about the statement ACAB, and also like what you think about the Nashville police when compared to the national level. So yes.
How I feel about the term. Everyone has a right to their opinion. I would say that. There are some people who express that. I mean, again, there's variations of people who express that. Some people just want to be reactionary because of the moment. Some people have say that because it's not about individual police. I mean, I have plenty of friends actually that are associated with law enforcement. It's not about them. It's not about them. It's about the historic and current practices that exist, that are normalized in this country, and how it enacts violence and control over Black community. So I would say, to answer that first question, everyone has different opinions. It depends on who you're asking. I think the second question, as it relates to Metro Nashville Police, as it relates to other police departments across the country, you hear about the Trayvon Martins, you hear about the Mike Browns, you hear about the George Floyds. We have our own. We have our own. Whether you're talking about Daniel Hambrick, Jacques Clemens, Walter Johnson, the names are endless, and every city has them. So to answer that question, they're a part of a larger system. They're part of a larger system. I don't know if anybody knows this, but the headquarters for Core Civic, formerly known as CCA, or I forget the name, what the full name.
Corrections Corporation of America.
Corrections Corporation of America is headquartered here in Nashville. For those who don't know who that is a private company, private prison company. Or a lot of you may have been in conversations about private prisons, prison industrial complex. The headquarters for that company, for private prisons, is here in Nashville. Just for context. So when we think about the fight for a safer world for Black folks, for those of us who are prison abolitionists, when we think about even for folks who just want police reform, here in Nashville, that headquarters is here, right? It doesn't. All you have to do is look at our page. Honestly, look at our page as well as others. You can look at Gideon's Army's page and everything. You can see how the relationship between Nashville, Black Nashville especially, and the Metro Nashville Police Department has been. I'm not sure if you've seen, are you familiar with the Community Oversight Board or the Driving While Black report? Yeah, it was a report that was released 2.5 years ago, conducted by several social scientists, researchers at Vanderbilt and other places, where they were tracking the amount of stops Black folks were experiencing by the Metro Nashville Police for different reasons. Long story short, that report revealed that a lot of Black folks in Nashville were being disproportionately stopped for reasons that could only be attributed to them being Black, honestly. And so you have that. You can also find more information out. And this is another organization to plug into, the Community Oversight Board, the Metro Community Oversight Board. They have a Facebook page, they have a Twitter page. I believe they also have a Instagram as well. Keep up with them, because they're literally there to hold the police force, Metro Nashville Police Force, accountable to some degree, whether it's just reporting or calling into question certain issues of police misconduct.
Thank you.
No problem. I saw a question about performative activism. Saw that somewhere?
Hi, that was me. Oh, wait.
Yes.
Hi. I was just wondering, so with social media, like, how can white people support the movement without being performative, or without people thinking they don't support the movement because they aren't posting about it? I just feel like there's kind of this gray area that people don't really know about, and I just think it would be nice to figure that out.
Whew. So much has been written on this. So much has been said. I'll answer it this way. First, plug into the campaigns that are currently in the city. Like I said, we have Nashville People's Budget Coalition. You can start off with liking their pages, following them on social media, looking for their events, attending them, asking questions, figuring out ways that you can help. So the first level is plugging into organizations that meet your needs, that not meet your needs, I'm sorry, that where you can jump into movement work. The second level is constantly educate yourself, not just about the plight of Black people, but the history of white folks and how these systems were created. I think there's this thing that happens where when white folks, when you read about certain realities as related to systemic racism, you read about things that Black folks go through, it stops there. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is so bad. Oh my, and then you kind of left with, what do? You also have to look at the other end. You have to look at why these systems are created, right? These are people that create these systems, right? These are ideas. What are white folks' contribution to those ideas? How did this system get created, right? And so you have to educate yourself on those things. And there's a plethora of books that go into that directly. And I think the third thing is let it transform, like let those first two things transform your daily life and practices, right? I think one of the most powerful things that white folks can do is not necessarily jump into efforts done or movement work that's done within Black communities or Indigenous communities or brown communities. It's organizing and transforming white communities. It challenge your family members when they say something racist or bigoted or something that you know is based in some type of ignorance or bigotry. Challenge your friends when no Black folks or people of color are around. Challenge yourself when you think of something that is rooted in some form of like bigotry or anti-Blackness in this instance. It's a constant labor. It's not something that you get to when you're like, oh my God, I'm so woke, I made it, I'm done. No, it's a lifetime effort. And it's a constant state of sacrifice. There's no way around it, right? This is a system. And so I think those three things, plugging into organizations, grassroots organizations that are doing grassroots work in the city or state, constant education, political education, and then letting those first two things transform your life. That's how white folks can step up.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yenny, you're going to ask your question?
I think Jaden was before me.
Jaden? Okay, sorry about that. Jaden,
No, sorry.
get on in there.
Okay. So my question was just like, being a student of color, I've realized that like a lot of the ignorance that I've run into is not necessarily out of hate, but it's out of a lack of education. So has like the Black Lives Matter movement here in Nashville done anything like within the educational system?
So one of the things that we used to do, and we may reignite, wasn't directly in the Metro Nashville public school system, but something we did in the larger community, was this activity called Books and Breakfast. And it was a thing that we used to do where we used to serve free breakfast to the community. We did it up in North Nashville, and we would take that time for folks who would participate to talk about a certain topic as it relates to systemic racism or colonialism, something larger than that, or a local issue. And there would be a presentation done on the issue. There would be a discussion that would be had. And there will also be books available for community members to borrow and bring back for the community to benefit from. And so that was one thing that we did in the past to engage in education. I would say that one of the most important things as a Black person, and I'm speaking specifically to us, is our self-education, right? I think there's multiple levels here, right? And I think it's good when there's opportunities for white folks and other folks to learn about our conditions, our plights, and everything. But you can't give from an empty cup. So you want to make sure that you're actually educating yourself and your friends about our plight, what we're going on, connecting your everyday conditions to the text that you read, whether you be Dr. King, Louis P. Newton, Stokely Carmichael, Dr. Jared A. Ball, so many other people. And then from there, you want to, if there are opportunities to educate others, you do so. Give me one second. I'm actually going to go turn on the light. Okay.
I can go next if Jaden's done. Oh, sorry, it's really dark. I'm in a bunk bed, so I don't want to get down. But I can turn on my flashlight. It's gonna look weird. Can you see me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually wrote a research paper on the Black Panther Party and like how through their programs they were able to expose the government by like, so the government would go in and raid breakfast areas where preschoolers were eating breakfast, or like they wouldn't prioritize the health of Black Americans, and they would like not publicly say it, but it was like pretty obvious, or they would accuse BPP of fraud when they were actually just preparing students for life through their school that I think recently shut down, if and I could be mistaken, but that's one of the other examples. And there's so many other examples of how it happened. And like we all know the Black Panther Party to be like this program/organization that did things intentionally and did it like in a specific way. Are there any other organizations since BPP other than Anonymous that works towards doing the same thing, that like exposing the government will help Black communities?
So I'll answer this by saying that since the Panthers, there have been many grassroots organizations, networks, movements that have been inspired by them in different ways. One of the ways that we're inspired, not only just in ideology, but also in practice, is really making efforts to engage in political education with folks. I know as far as like exposing government issues, I think when we do our campaigns talking about the ways in which police brutalize Black folks, or the ways in which the budgets in the city are prioritized towards needs that aren't reflective of the people here, that's us exposing the government, for lack of better terms. So it's really with more subtle, local, tangible ways, but I think in general, I would say a lot of organizations like us, and even those that aren't necessarily like us, we just encourage people to engage in political education because of the age of information that we're in, a lot of that information is out there. It's just that a lot of people don't know where to look. And so what we try to do as we plug people into campaigns is to point them in the right direction. So I hope I answered your question. Give me 1 second. I'm actually going to get my charger because my computer's about to die.
Okay, thank you.
As he's getting his charger, if you're not looking at chat, a number of resources are being shared, not only by us, but by other participants. So take a look.
I think there's a series of student questions there that we can get to in some kind of order. And there's some alum questions. Let's see if I back up. I know Gary Peters has a question. Alice May, alum, class of 17, Alice, I think, has a question there. Jude Warren has a question. So there are a few student questions kind of stacked up. So whenever you're ready, students and alum, shout them out.
Yep.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? Am I?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So yeah, I was gonna ask, in the documentary, in the email that Mr. White sent out, it was called Stay Woke, the Black Lives Matter movement. They mentioned that like civil rights leaders like Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson went to Michael Brown's funeral, and there was a lot of opposition, or at least they said there was a lot of opposition from like younger activists, younger protesters, people who had been protesting in Ferguson previous to the funeral. And yeah, because the civil rights leaders hadn't been on the ground already, they hadn't really been there. And so I was just going to ask, what are your thoughts on the division between younger activists and newer movements such as Black Lives Matter and what the documentary called the old guard of civil rights leaders, and also how can young people work with older leaders in the movement?
Those are two great questions. So I would say in short that tension is, I would say, largely ideological. And what I mean by that, for those who don't know, is they're competing visions of what we want the end goal to be, right? The reality is you have you have certain folks, typically in the old guard, that are reformists, right? They want to, for example, throw a body cam on a camera or on police officers. Make prisons more humane, right? Certain sort of band-aids, right? Folks who typically are younger tend to have a much more radical vision of what they want. And what's interesting to note is that some of the ideological or beliefs of the younger activists tend to align with those of the older generation who were assassinated or who were exiled or who were, insert effort to wipe them out here, i.e. the Panthers, i.e. Benny Lou Hamer, Ella Baker. You know, for example, like Black Lives Matter, we're a prison abolitionist organization. There aren't a lot of people who are abolitionists. For those who don't know, that's envisioning a world without the prison industrial complex as we know it, redefining public safety in a way that doesn't involve the carceral system, because we understand the prison industrial complex in the United States as a vestige or aftermath of institutional chattel slavery, vis-a-vis the 13th Amendment exception clause. A lot of people don't have that politic, right? They don't, they're like, I don't know about that. I don't know about world without police as we know it. We can just change things here, change things there. We need the prisons, we need the police. So there's that tension, right? There's that ideological tension between between younger activists, organizers, and older folks. However, there is overlap. To answer your second question, not all people in the old guard, for lack of better terms, have the same ideologies. We learned prison abolition, we learned our politics, intracommunalism, a lot of those things from elders. Some of those elders are still around. And so one of the things that we do is we learn from them, whether it's directly or we read their work. And so that's one way we stay connected, or we connect with older folks. Also, too, on a practical level, even though we have ideological differences, younger and older, young and old guard, there's overlap. We all want to see Black folks live to see another day. We want to put food in Black folks' mouths. We want to address these systemic issues, and we recognize, timetables. Prison abolition is not going to come tomorrow, right? And so we understand that, reforms along the way, that's cool. So we have moments where we can say, okay, let's get X done. Let's get this reform done. And we can work with the old guard, and we can work with folks who align in that way. So I think that would answer your question.
I think Alice and Nee, I think both your questions they're slightly connected or adjacent. So if you all want to toss those out as kind of things that schools like us can do, and if you all want to take them and frame them in your own way, by all means, but I think they're good questions for us to think about too.
Yeah, I'm just curious, like, what you think sort of beyond the internal reckoning that I think a lot of institutions are having right now, what you would kind of like to see on, above an individual level and above like the individual actors within, like, whether it's a university or private school or anything like that. Yeah, that's, I guess.
So I want to make sure I understand it. So like how do we transform like things as we know it beyond just one university or one person? Or
yeah, and I guess just like in terms of a commitment, like in terms of I think a lot of like institutions are wary of like getting political and that sort of thing, and like want to address racism in specific ways, and like is there sort of a way that on an institutional level there can be that same mobilization, or is that something that needs to come from individuals?
I think both and, right? I don't think it's an either or. I think that individuals can help push that larger mobilization. If there are folks that are on the institutional level that are daring to think more radically and to reimagine ways in which education is done, and the ways in which it perpetuates white supremacy or colonialism, then by all means, I think they should do that. That would be great. But we also recognize that a lot of institutions, being the reinforcement or the perpetrators of these things, are not likely to do that. So this is why I also say it's also on individuals as well, because individuals or groups of people can push the envelope, right? Students lead a lot of change. Students are often at the forefront of change. So I would say both. I would say both. If there are folks who are daring to do that on the university level, absolutely push for it. But if not, if there's students on the ground, whether it be one person or a group of people or an organization of students, make it happen. Anywhere that it can come, let it come.
Okay, and then also this kind of ties into the last question, but how should discipline, like going on and with after like well, not after the movement, but you know, in light of the movement, how should discipline look like? What should it look like in schools? And on a spectrum of discipline, where should racist acts and bigoted acts lie? That was really worded awfully, sorry, but.
No, I think I get it. So are you talking about within the spectrum of like the school system or just larger society?
I mean, it could be both, but especially within the school and yeah, within the school mostly.
Okay, so in our visioning, again, we are an abolitionist organization. And so one of the things we believe in is the abolition of prison industrial complex policing as we know it, and moving towards a more transformative system. So I would say implementing things such as restorative justice practices. Gideon's Army is a huge advocate, especially in North Nashville, and a huge practitioner of these things. So I would encourage folks to check Gideon's Army's work out if you want to see what alternatives to punitive measures are, like their approach to restorative justice and how that's transformed kids' lives, especially Black kids in North Nashville. I would implore folks to look into transformative justice. Transformative justice acknowledges that a harm was done, is the harm an agent of harm. It recognizes that it doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship or conditions will be restored, but it will be acknowledged in a way to where you can get to the root of the problem and then find ways to rectify the issue as best as possible and move forward from there. And those are just two examples that come to mind. And I also would implore folks, challenge yourself to think with us, to imagine with us. Outside of transformative justice, restorative justice, think about in your own life where, a better vision or more comprehensive vision when it comes to these issues associated with discipline. Challenge the notion of discipline, right? Because if you get to the root of a lot of these issues that we're thinking of, no matter how extreme, they can point to a social condition that wasn't addressed, right? So, it's not just on movement folks, as we like to call it, to imagine with us. We invite folks to imagine a more comprehensive, a more humane world, right? That actually gets to the root of a problem rather than just reacting and throwing the problem under the rug or behind bars.
So I guess, sorry, but how do you suggest then with like getting to the root of the problem, how can administration students get to the root of racist acts done by white people or non-people of color? Because it needs to stop. Like we've talked a lot about like people not feeling heard and like racist acts happening, and I think you have a really good perspective. So like, how can we bring this into our schools specifically?
So in the meantime, right, so I've presented the larger vision. In the meantime, administrators can re-examine some of the policies that they have as far as like addressing these issues and asking themselves what in our policies gives space for these acts to occur and to be normalized, and how can we correct for that, right? If there's like a series of policies where like if you don't have a policy on certain racist acts or certain acts of racial terror, think about creating one, administrators. Be explicit, be direct. As far as students, because again, students have power. Students can organize amongst themselves, create groups, spaces for people to vent to other students, or to faculty, depending on how you want to do that, to articulate these problems. You can document them. And you can, in so many ways, push the administration to answer those questions about policy, right? And I think too, even beyond like the administration, students, when you see something, say something. You know, it's not, it can be a scary experience, right? Especially if you might be that white person or that white or the non-Black person that hears something racist or anti-Black, and it's like, whoa, somebody actually said this. But as one of my comrades said in the chapter, do it scared. Do it scared. You know that you're scared. Do it anyway, right? Because it's one thing for you to be scared as somebody who's observing it. Imagine what the person who's experiencing it is feeling, right? So, and doing that scared can show you what a lot of us organizers and a lot of us people who may be out on the streets or in these organizations know to be true. We're not superhuman. We are human beings like everyone else, and so we have fears. We have everything. We have everything that makes us hesitant to do things, but we do them anyway because we understand the larger issue, right? So I would just say, I would say, stand up for each other, point it out in front of each other, even if it's just saying, hey, chill out. Hey, that was racist. Hey, such and such, notifying a teacher, or organizing amongst yourselves. Organizing isn't just, with Black Lives Matter Global Network or these other organizations, right? You can organize as students, right? Or as friend groups, right? And challenge everybody else to do the same. But those are some suggestions I would suggest.
Thank you.
No, we're having, great conversation. I also want to be cognizant of time. It's 8:22, and I know that at some point I have to let Denzel go to bed. So I want to finish with I want to ask him one last question that he can kind of lead us out on. And that question is, Denzel, is Black Lives Matter a moment or a movement?
Black Lives Matter is a movement. It's a call to action. It's a call to folks to imagine a freer world, a world free from a world where white skin is deemed human while all else is deemed disposable. It challenges us to envision a world where no person is defined by a dollar amount. It challenges us to live in a world where folks that may not be heterosexual, that may not be cisgender, are also considered human. It's challenging us to live a more humane and a freer world. And so I think the Black Lives Matter movement is a part of a larger Black liberation movement and a larger movement to transform this world and make it materially and ideologically better for folks that look like me and you.
All right. Well, once again, I like I said, I told Denzel I was not going to keep him all night. I see that we've gone over that time. First off, I would like to thank Denzel for giving of your time to speak with us. He did not bring this up. I'm going to put him on the spot. Denzel, you said you're from Nashville.
Yep.
Do you want to go a little further into
Yeah.
Nashville
I am an alum of Montgomery Bell Academy. So class of 2010. It's been a little minute since I've been in high school. So, but yes, I am an alum of Montgomery Bell Academy.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. But yeah, like I said, I want to thank you for giving up your time, your knowledge. Your passion is obvious when you're speaking with us, and just taking this opportunity to allow us to ask questions of you, of the Black Lives Matter Nashville group. If I would ask you while I have you here, if there's anyone on the call that has a question that's been unanswered, Denzel, do you mind me maybe collecting those and forwarding them to you because we didn't have a chance to
Yes.
address them, and maybe we could address them offline. That would be fantastic. Well, yeah, so thank you for doing that. Thank everyone for being on the call, taking this opportunity out of your evening to be part of our first Salon Series conversation. For those of you who have the opportunity and the bandwidth, we're doing this again next week. So our next one is on next Tuesday. So you can stay abreast of that. You'll see more information coming out about it. I am once again thankful for all of you all being here tonight. And I hope that you all have a wonderful evening with the rest of your evening. Unlike me, you probably haven't eaten dinner yet, but I'm going to do that now. And like once again, I just thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday.
Thank y'all.